My name is Margaret Ellis. When this story began, I was 62 years old, living alone in a small town in Ohio, and trying to figure out what the next chapter of my life was supposed to look like. Life had been good to me in many ways. It had also been difficult. My husband, Robert, had passed away 7 years earlier after a long illness. Our 2 children were grown, busy with families of their own, and living several states away. The house felt quieter every year. Not sad, exactly. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that settles into the corners of a home and reminds you how quickly time passes. One autumn afternoon, my daughter called. "Mom," she said gently, "have you ever thought about meeting someone?" I laughed. "At my age? Especially at your age?" Her answer stayed with me. For weeks afterward, I thought about it while watering plants, folding laundry, and watching the leaves drift across my backyard. Eventually, I agreed to let a friend arrange a blind date. Nothing serious. Just coffee. Just conversation. Just one afternoon. The morning of the date, I felt surprisingly nervous. I stood in front of the mirror longer than necessary. I chose a simple blue sweater Robert had always liked. Not because I was trying to replace him. No one could. But because wearing it felt comforting. Like carrying a piece of the past into an uncertain future. The coffee shop sat on a corner downtown. It reminded me of places from years ago. Wooden tables. Soft music. The smell of fresh coffee and cinnamon. People reading newspapers instead of staring at phones. Or perhaps I simply wanted to remember it that way. I arrived 15 minutes early. That was something my generation learned long ago. If a meeting starts at 2, you arrive at 1:45. As I stood in line, I reached into my purse. Then my stomach dropped. I checked again. And again. My wallet wasn't there. I had left it at home. For a moment, I froze. The coffee wasn't expensive. But without my wallet, I couldn't pay for anything. I considered leaving. Maybe I could call and cancel. Maybe I could pretend something had come up. Embarrassment settled heavily on my shoulders. At 62, I felt like a teenager making a foolish mistake. Then I heard a warm voice behind me. "Looks like you're having a rough moment." I turned. The man standing there appeared to be around my age. Silver hair. Kind eyes. A weathered brown jacket. The sort of face that immediately put people at ease. I smiled awkwardly. I forgot my wallet. He nodded as though this happened every day. That can happen to anyone. Before I could respond, he looked at the cashier. "I'll cover her coffee." "Oh no," I said quickly. "You don't have to do that." "It's only coffee," he replied. Then he smiled. "And someday you'll help someone else." There was something remarkably comforting about the way he said it. No judgment. No expectation. Just kindness. The simple kind. The kind many people remember from decades ago. I thanked him. He introduced himself as Daniel Harper. I ordered a small coffee. He ordered tea. Then we moved to separate tables. Or at least that was the plan. A few minutes later, Daniel glanced around the crowded cafe. "Mind if I sit here?" he asked. Not at all. Soon we were talking. Not about impressive careers. Not about achievements. Just life. The best conversations often happen that way. Naturally. Without effort. Daniel told me he had been a high school history teacher for nearly 40 years. I told him about raising children and working at the local library. We shared stories about old family road trips. About handwritten letters. About neighborhood barbecues where everyone knew everyone else. We laughed about rotary phones and paper maps. Things younger generations would probably find hard to imagine. Time seemed to slow down. The way it does when you're genuinely enjoying someone's company. Then my phone rang. It was my blind date. Apparently he was running late. Very late. Nearly an hour late. I listened politely. Then I looked across the table at Daniel. At the man who had quietly helped a stranger without expecting anything in return. And suddenly I realized something. The most important people in life often arrive unannounced. Not through plans. Not through careful arrangements. But through ordinary moments. The blind date eventually arrived. We spoke briefly. He was perfectly pleasant. But there was no connection. No warmth. No easy conversation. After 20 minutes, we both knew it. We shook hands and wished each other well. When he left, Daniel was gathering his things. I laughed softly. Well, that was interesting. He smiled. Life usually is. There was a pause. Comfortable and unhurried. Then he asked. Would you like to have lunch sometime? For the first time in many years, I felt excited about what tomorrow might bring. Yes, I said. I'd like that. Over the next months, we met often. Lunches became walks. Walks became dinners. Dinners became long conversations that stretched into evening. Neither of us was trying to recreate youth. That wasn't the point. There is a special beauty in companionship later in life. You stop pretending. You stop competing. You stop worrying about impressing people. Instead, you learn to appreciate simple things. A shared meal. A familiar voice. Someone asking how your day was, and truly wanting to know. Daniel understood grief because he had experienced it himself. He understood loneliness. He understood gratitude. Most importantly, he understood kindness. 2 years later, we married in a small ceremony surrounded by family and friends. Nothing extravagant. Nothing complicated. Just joy. The quiet kind. Sometimes people ask how we met. They expect some grand romantic story. Instead, I tell them the truth. I forgot my wallet. I couldn't afford a cup of coffee. And a stranger standing behind me chose kindness. That small act changed the course of my life. Even now, whenever I see someone needing a little help, I remember Daniel's words. Someday you'll help someone else. And he was right. Because kindness has a way of traveling forward. From one person to another. From one season of life to the next. Like a candle lighting another candle without losing any of its own warmth. At this stage of life, I've learned something simple. The world doesn't change only through big events. Sometimes it changes through a cup of coffee. A gentle smile. A few encouraging words. And a stranger who reminds us that we are never as alone as we think. That is the gift Daniel gave me. And it began with the smallest act of kindness imaginable. Just a cup of coffee. And a heart willing to share it.